Two of the new tax laws that went into effect in 2025 under the One Big Beautiful Act was the no tax on tips and the no tax on overtime. And if you found that those didn't affect your tax return quite as much as you thought it would, you're not alone. There were some limitations on those deductions that many people didn't understand because they weren't explained well in all of the sound bites that came out from Congress and the IRS. I'm going to explain those a little bit better so you can understand how they will affect your taxes in 2026 and also how they have to be documented. 2025 was considered a transition year by the IRS, so they were allowing employers and employees to use different documentation to back up those deductions on tax returns. But going into 2026, everything will have to be given to the IRS directly so that their computers can match those up to your tax return going forward. It will also make things easier for you on your tax return and for tax preparers to make sure everybody's getting it right. So the first one was the no tax on overtime, and that one, even tax preparers were very confused and asking a lot of questions this year because overtime can come in many different forms on paychecks. And it ended up being very limited on which overtime really was eligible for that deduction. So the only overtime that is eligible for that deduction is the FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act overtime, which is just the federal law that says if you work more than 40 hours in a week, the employer has to pay time and a half. All of that overtime is eligible to be deducted on the 1040. If you have collective bargaining agreements or other contracts with your employer and employees, such as a rule that says if you work a holiday, you get double or triple time, none of that is deductible on the tax return. That is not eligible overtime pay. And the other bit that really got everyone's attention was that it was only the overtime portion. So if you worked 10 hours of overtime at $20 an hour, and that was time and a half, only the half time was eligible. So it wasn't the whole $200 that you got to deduct on your tax return. So that really surprised some people. They saw, they had $5,000 of overtime pay on their pay stub and thought all of that would be deductible, but really it was only a third of that. So watch for that and make sure if you're an employer on your payroll systems that the payroll systems going into 2026 are coding that correctly, as the IRS will want to see that on W-2s exactly how much eligible deductible overtime there was, not total overtime hours or total overtime pay. The other one was the no tax on tips, and this is great for servers or anyone in an industry that typically receives tip income. The IRS did put out a list of industries that this applied to because basically Congress didn't want employers reclassifying wages as tips and saying, oh, all of our clients got very generous this year and started giving all of my tax preparers tips, so half their wages were tips and half was salary. So if you're in an industry like I am that doesn't typically receive tips as part of your wages, you're not eligible even if you do get tips here and there. If you're in a service industry such as a hairdresser or working in a restaurant, then all of those tips were deductible up to limits on the 1040. Now, last year, again, like I said, with the overtime, the IRS was taking pay stubs and other things, letters from employers saying how much the tips were that were deductible. Going into 2026, that will have to be shown directly on pay stubs in order for that to be eligible. It's to capture, they know there's a lot of tips that aren't already shown on pay stubs because employees keep cash tips. It's never told to the employers, so Social Security, Medicare, taxes never paid on it, and it's not on the W-2, so nobody's paying tax on it. So if it doesn't show up on the W-2, they don't want you to double dip on a tax deduction. by not paying tax on it in the first place because it's not on your W-2, and then deducting it because you have a letter from your employer or have some other documentation. So going into 2026, all tips have to be run through a W-2 in order to be deducted on your 1040. If you are self-employed, now this doesn't, unfortunately, if you're in a partnership, you can't utilize this rule. But if you're a Schedule C and you're self-employed, such as owning a hair salon, you can deduct those tips. But in 2026, make sure that you are running all of those through your point of sale system or another way through your bank, so it shows up either on a 1099K or a 1099 miscellaneous or a 1099 NEC. If the tips aren't reported to the IRS via those or a W-2, the IRS isn't going to let you deduct those. So you can keep the best records in the world and note down all your tips for the day. If it isn't formalized in some way and sent to the IRS, unfortunately, they're going to disallow that. And even this past year, even though it was supposed to be a transitional year, they were still sending out notices, especially if it was a big amount. I had a couple of clients that had larger amounts of overtime, and the IRS did hold up their refunds and sent out letters saying that they were requesting more information. So that's just something to keep in mind. You can have the best documentation in the world, but the IRS and tax regulations do require that certain procedures be followed and that employers tell them exactly what the numbers are going forward. So that's why you may have not received quite the deduction you thought you had on each of those. But hopefully in 2026, both of those are much easier for tax preparers and taxpayers to figure out. It should be much easier for employers to report because payroll systems will have time to update all of their software and have that put into paychecks better and make things a little bit easier for everyone. So if you have any questions on this, drop them in the comments below. I will try to answer general questions as much as possible and just try to help clarify this a little bit and help everyone get it right going into 2026. I will see you on the next destination.